think I relate to any of my characters. I've played a crack addict from Boston. I've played an Upper East Side princess.
Hi besties, I am Zuriyata Bashan Lashari with Corevanta. Today we should discuss about the
Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni has become more than just another Hollywood dispute. It has spiraled into a high-stakes legal chess match that could end her courtroom battle before it ever truly begins, a spectacle that has gripped Hollywood insiders, gossip blogs, and legal analysts alike, with every new motion filed in court drawing more attention than a red carpet premiere. And now the situation has reached a boiling point because Justin Baldoni's lawyers have executed one of the coldest, most technical, yet most devastating maneuvers in civil litigation, a motion for judgment on the pleadings, a procedural strike that essentially tells the judge, even if you believe every single word of Blake's complaint is true, it still doesn't amount to a legal case. And that argument, stripped of drama, stripped of celebrity tears, stripped of sensational headlines, reduces the fight to cold black and white law, leaving no room for spectacle, no stage for public sympathy, no witnesses, no discovery, no salacious text messages, no behind-the-scenes secrets spilling out into the open, nothing but dry paper and technical definitions, and if the judge agrees, it means Blake's entire lawsuit will be dismissed with prejudice, a phrase that sounds simple but carries terrifying finality, because dismissal with prejudice doesn't just mean not today, it means never again. It means that door is locked permanently, welded shut, never to be reopened, no rematch, no refile, no second bite at the apple, her claims buried in legal cement forever. And the irony of it all is almost Shakespearean, because here is Blake Lively, a Hollywood icon whose entire career is built on commanding attention, on ensuring her story is told, on being the center of a narrative, suddenly facing the possibility of never even getting to speak her side of the story in court, silenced before the first witness is called. Before the first cross-examination, before the first shred of evidence makes its way into the public record, and that silence could prove deadlier to her career and reputation than any defeat at trial, because at least with a trial there is theater, there is sympathy, there is an audience to be swayed, but with a dismissal this early, the public narrative shifts instantly to Blake Lively filed a frivolous lawsuit and lost. And in the cutthroat world of Hollywood, where perception is currency, that kind of headline can do irreparable damage, worse than losing a role, worse than a box office flop, worse than a scandal, because it paints her not as a victim but as someone who tried to manipulate the legal system and failed. And this is exactly the trap Baldoni's lawyers are setting. They are not just fighting her on facts, they are seeking to redefine the story entirely, to erase the possibility of discovery, to erase the possibility of embarrassing depositions, to erase the possibility of her dragging Baldoni through months of public mudslinging. They want to slam this case shut like a steel vault, and they have picked a strategy brutal in its simplicity but devastating in its effect. And while most casual observers imagine lawsuits as long, dramatic sagas, lawyers yelling, witnesses crying, juries gasping, the reality is often much colder, because in the early stages of litigation, there are secret weapons like motions for judgment on the pleadings that can decapitate a lawsuit before it even stands upright, and that is precisely what is at stake here, because the judge could, with a single stroke of the pen, erase Blake's entire case from existence, leaving nothing but questions, speculation, and whispers of what might have been. And to make matters worse, Baldoni's team isn't just relying on the motion itself. They are complicating the battlefield by introducing a war over jurisdiction, a war not about facts or witnesses but about maps and state lines, because while Blake filed in California, Baldoni's lawyers are insisting the bulk of events took place on the East Coast, in New York and New Jersey, and that difference is not just academic. It could decide the fate of the case, because California's employment and retaliation laws are notoriously broad, covering a wide spectrum of behavior, giving plaintiffs more room to claim retaliation or harassment, while New York's laws are narrower, stricter, offering defendants more protection. And so the real battle is not just about what happened, but about which state's playbook will be used to interpret it. And that seemingly boring, technical question of California versus New York could be the difference between life and death for this lawsuit. And here lies The cruel brilliance of Baldoni's strategy, because if California law applies, Blake may be doomed anyway due to a procedural error, failing to first file with the state labor board, a mandatory step before suing, and if she skipped it, her whole case collapses instantly like a house of cards. But if New York law applies, many of the behaviors she alleges may simply not count as retaliation under that narrower legal definition. So either way, she is trapped, boxed in from both sides, with Baldoni's lawyers essentially saying, no matter which road you choose, you fall off the cliff. And while legal commentators debate the nuances, the spectacle for the public is undeniable, because people don't just want to know about the law, they want the gossip, they want the secrets, they want to know whether Blake really had smoking gun texts, whether Baldoni is hiding damning evidence, whether Brian Friedman has a master plan, and all of that may never come to light if the judge grants this motion, because discovery, the phase where all the juicy details usually spill out, never happens. No depositions, no subpoenas, no embarrassing documents, no truth bombs, just silence. And that silence is the deadliest weapon of all, because it leaves the field open for Baldoni's PR machine to declare victory, to frame the narrative, to say she tried, she failed, the court saw through it, and Blake is left with nothing, no platform, no trial, no chance, just a headline that she lost before she began. And in Hollywood, perception often matters more than the truth, and perception here could be career-shattering, because fans forgive mistakes, they forgive scandals, they even forgive crimes, but they rarely forgive someone who looks like they tried to play the system and failed, and that is the nightmare scenario Blake is staring down right now. And while she may have Brian Friedman, one of the most feared and respected lawyers in celebrity litigation, at her side, the brilliance of Baldoni's legal team is undeniable, because this isn't just about out-arguing her, it's about denying her the very stage she was counting on to argue at all, about cutting the legs out from under her before she even steps into the ring, about killing the story before it becomes a story, and if they succeed, it will be one of the coldest, cleanest executions of a lawsuit Hollywood has ever seen, leaving behind only whispers, speculation, and an indelible stain on Blake Lively's reputation that no amount of PR spin may ever fully erase. When the world first heard the shocking headline, Justin Baldoni tells all, Blake Lively's secrets exposed in Courtroom Showdown, it wasn't just another celebrity gossip piece designed to light up social media feeds. It was the start of an unraveling that would shake Hollywood to its core, because what happened inside that tense courtroom wasn't simply about fame, fortune, or fleeting drama. It was about betrayal, manipulation, power plays, and secrets buried so deep that even the most seasoned insiders were left gasping for air, and as the cameras lined the courthouse steps with reporters from every major outlet, Corevanta, Variety, Deadline, and yes, even gossip blogs fighting for a front-row seat, the spotlight burned hottest on Justin Baldoni, a man who up until now had been painted as Hollywood's gentle storyteller, the empathetic director, the activist with heart. But on this day, he wasn't there to pitch a film or promote a movement. He was there with receipts, with truth, with a determination that hinted at scars deeper than the world realized, and sitting across from him, guarded by her legal team, yet visibly shaken under the harsh lights of accountability, was Blake Lively, the once darling of the industry who had crafted an image of perfection, wit, and effortless charm. But beneath that golden exterior was a tangled web of manipulation that was about to be torn apart, thread by thread, as Baldoni's testimony promised to lay bare secrets that not even the most ruthless tabloids had dared to whisper, and the world braced itself, asking, what could be so damning, so dangerous, that a man like Justin, respected, measured, cautious with his words, would step into the fire willingly, knowing full well the machine he was going up against, knowing Blake wasn't just another actress, but an institution backed by power players like Ryan Reynolds, PR titans, and legal sharks who specialized in burying scandals before they ever saw daylight. And yet here he was, unshaken, his voice carrying the kind of weight that made the entire courtroom lean forward, because when Baldoni began to speak, he didn't just tell stories, he painted pictures, he laid out timelines, he revealed behind-the-scenes exchanges that transformed whispers into undeniable realities, and with every word, Blake's carefully constructed empire began to crack, the illusion of innocence shattering like glass under a hammer. Because the secrets being dragged into the light weren't just about petty rivalries or artistic disagreements. They were about calculated betrayals, about silencing voices, about pushing people into corners so she could remain untouchable. And suddenly the courtroom wasn't just a legal battleground. It was a stage where masks fell away and reputations hung by a thread, with every eye fixed on Justin as he declared that for too long, Hollywood had been run by fear, by alliances, by the unspoken rule that you don't cross certain names. But he had chosen to cross Blake. Lively, and not out of spite, not out of bitterness, but because the truth had claws and once it dug into him, he could no longer sleep, no longer create, no longer breathe without freeing it. And as gasps echoed when he pulled out emails, texts, contracts, private recordings, each piece meticulously documented, it became clear this wasn't theater. It wasn't revenge. It was exposure on a scale rarely seen in a town where secrets are currency, and Blake's lawyers scrambled, objecting, stalling, spinning. But the judge, sharp-eyed and unimpressed, let the words roll, because justice has no patience for smoke and mirrors when evidence hits the table with the kind of clarity Baldoni carried. And as he spoke, social media outside exploded. Hashtags like hashtag Baldoni bombshell, hashtag Blake exposed, and hashtag Courtroom Showdown trending worldwide. Fans torn between disbelief and betrayal, asking themselves if the Blake they adored was merely a character in her own PR script, and if Justin was truly the whistle blower Hollywood never knew it needed. And the tension only thickened as names began to surface. Allies, accomplices, victims, all tied together in a narrative so messy it rivaled any script Gossip Girl could have dreamed up. And at the center of it all was a simple truth Baldoni repeated like a mantra. No one is untouchable when the truth comes out. And yet, as the words poured out of Justin Baldoni like gasoline on a fire, there was something undeniable in his tone. Something that stripped away any notion that this was simply performance or opportunism, because he didn't stumble, he didn't waver, he didn't cloak his statements in vague insinuations like so many before him had done when whispering about Blake Lively's iron grip on image and influence. No. He spoke with the precision of a man who had lived it, seen it, endured it, and now was finally free enough, or perhaps desperate enough, to name it. And as he recounted private dinners where deals were cut not for art but for leverage, late-night calls where threats were veiled as advice, and moments on set where careers were quietly sabotaged in the name of preserving her shine, the courtroom became something far larger than four walls. It became an echo chamber for every unheard voice in Hollywood that had been pushed aside in service of protecting the golden narrative. And Blake, sitting there with her hair perfectly styled, her outfit chosen to communicate innocence and vulnerability, could no longer mask the storm brewing in her eyes, because the words were landing, the receipts were real, and every attempt her lawyers made to spin Justin as bitter or opportunistic was drowned out by the sheer weight of the evidence. And the press outside went rabid, headlines drafted before the recess even hit. Friedman faces off, Baldoni breaks silence, Blake on the brink. And the chatter wasn't just about scandal anymore. It was about consequence, about accountability, about whether one of Hollywood's most untouchable names could actually face something as damning as perjury, fraud, or even jail time if the allegations escalated from whispers to charges. And though the judge had yet to utter the word criminal, the murmurs in the gallery grew louder with each revelation. Because the line between scandal and crime is thin when manipulation involves money, contracts, reputations, and lies under oath. And Justin, undeterred by the daggers Blake's team shot at him, continued with a chilling calm, saying that the Blake people adored on red carpets was a mirage, a calculated mask, and that behind it lay decisions that destroyed lives, stifled creativity, and rewrote careers in order to secure her dominance. And when he finally dropped the bomb, that even Ryan Reynolds had been aware of some of these tactics, though whether complicit or merely silent was a question hanging in the air. The room erupted, gasps echoing like thunder, because suddenly this wasn't just Blake versus Justin, it was Blake and Ryan, Hollywood's golden couple, being dragged into the mud, their perfect Instagram-worthy marriage now at risk of being painted as a business alliance forged on secrecy and silence. And even the judge leaned back, pen paused, eyes narrowing as if weighing the gravity of what was unfolding. Because when someone is respected, as Baldoni risks, everything to expose someone as powerful as lively, it means the rot runs deep. And in that moment, every camera outside seemed to zoom tighter, every tweet sharper, every whisper louder, because the illusion was collapsing in real time, and people couldn't look away, because whether you loved Blake or hated her, whether you believed Justin or doubted him, the spectacle was undeniable, and the stakes were suddenly higher than gossip. They were about truth, justice, and the possibility that one of Hollywood's most beloved icons might actually have to trade red carpets for a courtroom sentence. And Baldoni, with fire in his voice, reminded everyone watching that the truth is not a weapon until you wield it. And wield it he did, like a sword cutting through years of silence. As Blake's team scrambled to regroup, whispers of counterattacks, lawsuits, smear campaigns already in the air. But for now, for this moment, she was cornered, stripped of her carefully rehearsed defenses, facing a reckoning she never thought would come. And yet, even as Justin Baldoni's words settled like ash across the courtroom, igniting conversations that stretched from Hollywood boardrooms to fan forums halfway across the world, there was a deeper tension building beneath the surface, one that had less to do with celebrity gossip and more to do with the raw mechanics of justice, because Blake Lively's legal team, led by their carefully chosen attorneys with pristine reputations and deep connections, knew that if they allowed Baldoni's narrative to dominate unchecked, public opinion could metastasize into judicial influence, and that was something they could not risk. So while cameras flashed and reporters scrambled to file copy about Baldoni's accusations, inside the hushed strategy rooms of Blake's defense, a counterattack was already forming, not one of facts, but of optics. Because in the theater of the law, as in the theater of Hollywood, perception is power, and perception was slipping from their grasp, and yet Baldoni, aware of their moves, continued to double down, invoking not only his own experiences, but weaving in the testimonies of crew members, assistants, and colleagues whose careers had been quietly stalled or dismantled under suspicious circumstances that seemed to circle back, again and again, to Blake's need for control, her obsession with shaping every narrative. And what made this more chilling was not that these voices existed, but that they had been silenced for so long, some bought out with settlements, others bullied into contracts that barred them from speaking, still others simply too afraid to risk reputations against a woman whose charm in public masked a ruthlessness in private. And so when Justin spoke their truths, it wasn't merely his battle anymore. It became a proxy war for dozens, maybe hundreds, who had suffered in silence, and the courtroom began to feel less like a stage and more like a confessional, where every new revelation drew gasps. Every line of questioning peeled back another layer, until what had once seemed like a civil dispute between two entertainers now looked alarmingly like the unmasking of a system of manipulation that could, if proven, constitute fraud, retaliation, and even racketeering. And whispers of jail time no longer seemed like sensationalist tabloid bait, but a chilling possibility, because once fraud enters the equation, once tampering with contracts or evidence is even hinted at, the district attorney can enter the picture, and suddenly the stakes go from money to freedom, from image to survival. And though Blake sat poised, hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear, the kind of fear that only comes when someone realizes the narrative they've spun so perfectly for years is unraveling thread by thread in real time. And across from her, Brian Friedman, Baldoni's lawyer, watched carefully, every shift in her posture, every whisper to her team noted, because this wasn't just about law. It was about breaking her mask, showing the court, the press, and the public that the Blake they thought they knew was a character, not the woman. And as the hours dragged on, the tension grew unbearable, the judge calling for recesses to manage the chaos. But no recess could undo what had already been said, and by the time the gavel struck again, the trial was no longer just a case. It was a cultural event. Hashtags trending globally, fans divided, Hollywood insiders whispering about who might fall next if Blake did, and Ryan Reynolds' silence became its own headline, because if he defended her, he risked being pulled into the accusations, but if he stayed quiet, he looked complicit, and so every move, every absence, every word mattered, and Baldoni, sensing the momentum, refused to retreat, knowing that once you start pulling down the veil, you cannot stop halfway, you must rip it off completely, and that's what he vowed to do, even if it meant sacrificing his own comfort, his own career. Because, as he repeated in his closing remarks for the day, some truths destroy reputations, but others save lives, and those words rang out like a warning and a promise, leaving Blake staring down the abyss of her own undoing as the world waited with bated breath to see whether this courtroom showdown would end in settlement, scandal, or a prison sentence. But as the trial stormed forward, what became impossible to ignore was the way Baldoni's revelations had shifted the very air in the courtroom. No longer a sterile arena of motions and countermotions, but something electric, dangerous, alive with the weight of reputations and futures on the line. Because while Blake's attorneys scrambled to argue technicalities about jurisdiction, about whether California or New York law applied, their voices were drowned beneath the thrum of public attention. And it was clear to anyone watching that this was no longer just a battle of statutes but of stories, of whose version of events would burn itself into the memory of the court and the culture beyond it. And Justin Baldoni's story was sharp, simple, and devastating, built on the credibility of a man who had no reason to fabricate, who risked his own career by taking the stand, and layered with the haunting testimonies of those whose names were still sealed but whose experiences echoed through. His words, while Blake's counterstory, polished and rehearsed, rang increasingly hollow, the cadence of someone defending an empire rather than speaking from truth, and that perception became poison, seeping into the way jurors leaned in or crossed their arms, the way even the judge's eyebrow arched with skeptical weight, and Brian Friedman knew it, his strategy, less about the courtroom minutiae than about hammering a single, unshakable theme. That Blake Lively had for years operated with. Impunity, shielding herself behind glamour, privilege, and influence. But now the veil had slipped and justice would not allow her to hide, and so he pressed relentlessly, asking not only what she had done but why, building a portrait of intent that is the lifeblood of any case that threatens criminal referral, because juries can forgive mistakes, but they cannot forgive malice, and if malice was proven here, if calculated retaliation, fraud, or deceit were shown to be part of her playbook, then the whispers of jail were not exaggerations, but very real shadows on the horizon, and every day that passed seemed to drag her closer to them. Yet Blake, ever the actress, tried to counter with a performance of her own, eyes wide with innocence, tone hushed with humility, insisting she was the victim of a smear campaign orchestrated by Baldoni to revive his own relevance. But the words rang hollow against the tidal wave of specifics coming from the other side, and when Friedman produced emails, texts, and fragments of contracts that hinted at discrepancies, the room buzzed with a sick thrill, because evidence was now aligning with testimony, and when those two forces combine in a courtroom, the walls start to close in fast, and Blake felt it, shifting in her chair, whispering sharply to her lawyers, her carefully composed mask slipping just enough to betray the flicker of panic beneath. And while she sat unraveling under the fluorescent lights, outside the courthouse the world split into factions, hashtags warring across social media, some screaming, "Justice for Justin," while others clung to "Stand with Blake." But the undercurrent, the one no PR spin could silence, was the growing fear that this case was no longer one she could win quietly, no longer a nuisance to be dismissed with a well-placed motion, but a wildfire that threatened to consume everything she had built, her brand, her marriage, her future, and for perhaps the first time in her public life, Blake Lively looked less like the golden girl of Hollywood and more like a defendant teetering on the edge of ruin, because once the idea of prison enters the public imagination, it is nearly impossible to erase, and Baldoni's relentless pursuit ensured that idea was not just alive but thriving, echoing from every headline, every late-night monologue, every whispered industry conversation about whether this was finally the end of an era where fame could buy silence, and as the gavel fell to close another day of testimony, Both sides knew the fight was far from over, but only one side looked like they were running out of oxygen, and it wasn't Justin Baldoni. And yet, as the courtroom saga pressed into its final stretch, what nobody could deny was that the narrative had already metastasized far beyond the four walls of the courthouse. It had become a cultural reckoning, a spectacle where the question was no longer simply whether Blake Lively had wronged Justin Baldoni in some contractual or retaliatory sense, but whether the very system that had for so long shielded Hollywood's elite could withstand the exposure of one of its brightest stars being dragged into the muck of accountability. And the irony was sharp, because Blake had once played characters who thrived on manipulation, secrecy, and power struggles, but now the world was watching her live that script in real time. Except this time there was no director to yell cut, no editor to splice together a more flattering version, and as Brian Friedman bore down with his surgical precision, layering piece upon piece of testimony and evidence into a devastating crescendo, the sense in the room shifted from curiosity to inevitability, because while Blake's lawyers continued to hammer their motions, arguing that the entire case hinged on jurisdictional disputes and procedural missteps, the judge's patience thinned, his tone sharpening with each recycled objection, and the jurors, those ordinary men and women suddenly thrust into the role of arbiters between celebrity titans, sat visibly transfixed by Baldoni's insistence that this wasn't just a lawsuit but a chance to expose a pattern of deceit. And as his words tumbled into the air, thick with passion and righteous fury, the weight of them settled into the bones of everyone present, because deep down they all recognized that beneath the glitter of stardom, beneath the curated red carpets and magazine covers, there was a machinery of power that operated without consequence, and now that machinery had a face. And it was Blake's. And though she fought to maintain her composure, though she whispered strategy with her attorneys and flashed the occasional tight smile for the cameras, there were moments, fleeting but damning, when her mask cracked, when her eyes darted too quickly, when her jaw clenched a fraction too tight, when the image of untouchable grace gave way to the human reality of fear. And that was what the public latched onto, because in those cracks they saw the possibility that justice, however elusive, might finally pierce the armor of celebrity. And as the days bled together, the headlines only grew harsher. Phrases like collapse, scandal, and jail stamped across glossy magazine covers and digital feeds, and suddenly Ryan Reynolds, her partner in both life and brand, was thrust into the spotlight not for his own achievements, but for the silence that now screamed louder than any defense. His absence from the courtroom a Rorschach test interpreted as everything from quiet loyalty to deliberate distancing, and as speculation swirled, the core truth remained. This was Blake's battle, her reckoning, and no amount of Hollywood polish could scrub away the stench of the allegations as Baldoni's testimony burned through every PR distraction like acid through silk, because when he spoke of the intimidation, of the silenced voices, of the contracts bent, and the promises broken, it wasn't just a legal argument, it was a moral indictment, and juries are made of human beings, not lawyers, and human beings respond to morality more than minutiae, and Friedman knew it, weaving the technical with the emotional until the picture was undeniable, a portrait of a woman who, in her quest to control the narrative, had overreached, had retaliated. The courtroom battle between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni has quickly transformed from a simple celebrity dispute into a razor's-edge confrontation where every word, every filing, and every interpretation of the law could determine not just the fate of one case, but potentially how Hollywood itself navigates the dangerous overlap between publicity and retaliation. From the very beginning, the stakes were clear. This wasn't just about bruised egos or petty gossip. It was about whether the machinery of the entertainment industry could cloak potentially harmful behavior under the banner of public relations. One of the most fascinating and perilous aspects of this case is the legal geography itself, because when it comes to employment law, harassment claims, and retaliation statutes, the law is not uniform across the United States. A claim that might thrive in one state could collapse instantly in another. Judges have faced these crossroads before, and the outcomes could not be more different. In one well-known case, a harassment claim survived under California's broader protections, but legal experts admitted it would have been dead on arrival under New York's stricter, narrower laws. In another, a company dodged what could have been a massive verdict because the alleged events traced back to a jurisdiction with weaker worker safeguards. This means geography isn't just background context, it can flip a case completely, turning a potential victory into nothingness. For Blake Lively, this raises speculation about strategy. Did she deliberately file in California, not just because she resides there, but because its rules provide the strongest safety net for a claim like hers? Many insiders believe exactly that. Baldoni's legal team seems convinced her choice of venue was strategic, which is why they are pushing so aggressively to knock California law out of the equation and reframe the fight elsewhere. To them, this isn't merely about denying her accusations, it's about controlling the rulebook itself. If they succeed in tilting the legal playing field to a jurisdiction with weaker protections, they tilt the entire case. Yet even beyond the tug-of-war over jurisdiction, an even more complex question lingers. Was this really retaliation at all, or simply Hollywood PR? Blake insists she was targeted with a smear campaign, hostile press leaks, biting public comments, and whispers designed to paint her as unprofessional and to shred her reputation. She calls it a retaliatory strike meant to punish her for standing her ground. Justin, however, fires back with a very different framing. To him, and to his legal team, these weren't acts of retaliation. They were routine industry tactics, the kind of controversy-fueling press maneuvers that happen with nearly every major release in Hollywood. Think about how entertainment publicity operates. As soon as a project nears release, headlines start to look suspiciously timed. Stars hint at behind-the-scenes tension, directors tease creative clashes, and gossip columns suddenly overflow with dramatic sound bites. Publicists know the formula. Stir just enough controversy to spark chatter, let the tabloids amplify the noise, and watch the ticket sales rise. Baldoni's lawyers argue that's all this was. Business as usual, not a personal attack on Blake. And yet the razor's edge remains. Can such statements, framed as promotion, be interpreted by a judge as retaliation? If the court sees them as purely business, they are shielded as free speech under the First Amendment. But if they are seen as personal, targeted actions designed to punish Blake for asserting herself, then the narrative changes entirely. This is the knife point where the case balances. On one side, Blake frames the PR cycle as a malicious hit job dressed up as marketing. On the other, Baldoni's team insists this is constitutionally protected speech, the lifeblood of Hollywood promotion. Courts, however, tread carefully when speech rights are at play. Judges often extend strong protections even when words sting, even when reputations are dented, even when careers take hits. Consider the typical banter of a press tour. Actors joking about who is difficult on set, directors teasing stars about rewrites, co-stars trading playful insults. These quips, often exaggerated, spark headlines and keep audiences buzzing. If such moments could be classified as retaliation, then half of Hollywood's marketing machine would suddenly be actionable in court. Yet intent matters. If the intent was to actually damage someone's career under the cover of PR, then it is no longer harmless banter. It becomes a calculated strike. That is the fascinating challenge for the judge, deciding whether these statements fall into the world of cheeky press tactics or into the realm of career-damaging retaliation. The consequences are enormous. If the court rules it was just PR, Blake's retaliation claim evaporates, and the heart of her case weakens dramatically. If, however, the court sees it as punishment disguised as marketing, it sets a precedent that could alter how studios, stars, and publicists operate forever. Suddenly, the gamesmanship of hinting at drama could be seen not as clever hype, but as potential liability. Already, Baldoni's team has escalated by filing a motion for judgment on the pleadings. In plain terms, they are asking the judge, "Have you already seen enough? Can we dismiss this entire case now with prejudice so it cannot be refiled?" Such a motion is aggressive. It signals confidence, but it also underscores just how dangerous this case could be for Hollywood if it proceeds. Because if discovery is allowed, if texts, emails, and private conversations are dragged into the light, then the entire facade of it was just PR could crack open. For now, though, the courtroom remains caught between two versions of reality. Blake's story, that she was deliberately targeted and punished, Justin's story, that it was business, not personal. But beneath those competing narratives lies the broader question: where exactly is the line between gossip as entertainment and gossip as retaliation? And who gets to decide where that line is drawn? As the case pushes deeper into the courtroom, the lines between truth, strategy, and spectacle blur further. What makes this dispute so volatile isn't simply that Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni are famous. It's that the case forces a collision between two powerful worlds: the law, which demands precision, clarity, and fairness, and Hollywood, which thrives on ambiguity, spectacle, and illusion. The stakes are not only reputational, they are legal and financial, with the potential to redefine how the entertainment industry handles conflict. Blake's position is straightforward on the surface. She claims she was punished for daring to speak up, for challenging a system designed to silence. She points to the swirl of negative press, the sudden flood of critical headlines, and the whispers about her professionalism as evidence that she was deliberately undermined. Her legal team paints these events as carefully orchestrated retaliation, an effort to discredit her, discourage her, and remind others in the industry of the price of stepping out of line. To Blake, this is not random gossip but a weapon wielded against her, and she insists the courtroom is the only place to confront it. Baldoni's defense, however, cleverly reframes the entire picture. His lawyers argue that none of this is retaliation. It is the natural rhythm of Hollywood publicity. They explain how controversy has long been part of the marketing formula. When a movie is gearing up for release, attention must be created, and in an industry drowning in competing content, nothing captures attention faster than drama. A hint of tension between co-stars, a sly comment about disagreements on set, or even whispers of ego clashes, it all fuels public curiosity. For decades, studios have leaned into this playbook because gossip sells tickets. To Baldoni's team, this isn't retaliation. It isn't even personal. It's marketing. And if marketing now becomes actionable as retaliation, then nearly every studio campaign in Hollywood could be dragged into court. This is where the case takes on its razor's edge nature once again. For the judge, the task is almost impossible: to determine intent. Was the negative coverage surrounding Blake a calculated business move, or was it punishment wrapped in PR packaging? Courts are historically cautious when speech is involved. The First Amendment casts a long shadow, and judges are often reluctant to label expression, no matter how biting, as unlawful. Even damaging statements, if they are part of public discourse, frequently receive protection. Yet retaliation claims introduce a different lens. Speech may be free, but using speech to punish an individual for asserting legal rights can cross the line into illegality. This tension is not theoretical. Hollywood history is full of stars whose careers were destroyed not by a lack of talent, but by whispers, rumors, and narratives carefully shaped in the press. Some actors were branded difficult and never found steady work again. Others were linked to scandals, real or exaggerated, that forever tainted their image. If such campaigns can be proven to have retaliatory intent, then Blake's case could open the floodgates for similar lawsuits. That possibility terrifies studios and publicists alike. Imagine every edgy soundbite, every playful jab, every leaked rumor suddenly scrutinized in court as potential retaliation. The industry would have to rethink its entire promotional machinery. Blake's team, aware of this, emphasizes the difference between playful PR and targeted destruction. They argue that what happened to her went far beyond the usual banter of a press tour. The stories weren't jokes. They were narratives crafted to discredit her as unprofessional, unreliable, even toxic. In Hollywood, where reputation is currency, such portrayals can be lethal. Baldoni's team counters by downplaying these claims, insisting they are overblown. They argue that the same headlines Blake calls retaliation are the very type of coverage countless stars endure without complaint. To them, she is trying to reframe Hollywood norms into personal grievances, and then comes the legal hammer. Baldoni's lawyers file a motion for judgment on the pleadings. This maneuver essentially asks the judge to dismiss the case before it even reaches discovery, the stage where texts, emails, and private records could surface. By requesting dismissal with prejudice, They are asking not only for the case to be thrown out, but for Blake to be barred from refiling it. This is a bold, aggressive move that signals confidence or desperation. If the judge grants it, Blake's case ends here.
No discovery.
No chance to unearth behind-the-scenes communications that might support her claims. The public would be left with speculation, spin, and unanswered questions. But if the motion is denied, the case plunges into the discovery phase, where the real secrets could come to light. It is precisely this moment that has Hollywood insiders holding their breath. Discovery is the stage studios dread most. Private texts, unguarded emails, and raw internal documents often reveal more than public statements ever could. If Blake's team gains access to those materials, they could uncover proof of intent, communications that show whether the negative coverage was simply routine marketing or a deliberate strike. Baldoni's aggressive push to block discovery suggests his team knows just how dangerous that stage could be. Meanwhile, the court of public opinion rages on outside the courtroom. Fans, commentators, and industry insiders debate endlessly. Was Blake truly a victim of retaliation, or is she exploiting the Hollywood gossip cycle to recast herself as a martyr? Is Baldoni a ruthless manipulator hiding behind the shield of PR, or simply another player following industry norms? Each headline, each leak, each filing adds fuel to the fire. And while the legal battle moves at the deliberate pace of the courts, the narrative battle plays out in real time across tabloids and social media feeds. At its core, this is not just a fight between two celebrities. It is a referendum on Hollywood's culture of spin. If the court sides with Blake, it could signal the beginning of a new era where gossip as marketing is no longer untouchable. Studios may have to think twice before unleashing controversy as a promotional tool. If the court sides with Baldoni, the message will be clear. In Hollywood, gossip is business, and stars must live with the consequences. The irony is almost poetic. An industry that thrives on blurred lines between truth and fiction now finds itself forced to define those lines in the starkest terms. For Blake, the fight is personal. Her reputation, her career, her legacy. For Baldoni, the fight is systemic, defending not just himself, but the very machinery of Hollywood PR. For the rest of the industry, the outcome could reshape the rules of the game. And for the judge, the challenge is monumental. To see through the spectacle, to cut through the spin, and to decide whether this was retaliation or routine. The courtroom lights dim metaphorically as the case shifts focus to the looming question of discovery, a stage feared more than any other by those who thrive in the glossy chaos of Hollywood. Because discovery doesn't care about carefully crafted statements, it doesn't respect PR strategies, and it certainly doesn't bend to the will of agents, managers, or spin doctors. It deals in raw evidence, unfiltered conversations, and the kind of material that can sink reputations overnight. And this is exactly why Blake Lively's team has been pushing with such unrelenting determination to drag the case across that threshold. Because if they can, they unlock a vault of potential proof that goes beyond speculation and forces the court to confront the unvarnished truth behind the headlines. While Justin Baldoni's side knows this too well, which is why they are fighting tooth and nail to prevent discovery from ever being authorized, filing motions, narrowing definitions, and waiving constitutional protections like a shield, because once those texts and emails are in play, there is no predicting how damaging they could be, not only to Baldoni, but to others orbiting the case, perhaps producers, executives, or even fellow stars whose names have so far stayed out of the spotlight. And herein lies the true high-stakes gamble. For Hollywood is built not only on talent, but on secrets, on hidden arrangements, and on delicate alliances that collapse the moment they are exposed. And Discovery has the power to unravel all of it. Blake's argument here is compelling in its simplicity. She claims that her treatment was not only unfair but unlawful, that the campaign of negative coverage was retaliation, and if the court allows discovery, she is confident the evidence will prove it beyond question, pointing to timelines where stories broke conveniently after she asserted herself, to anonymous sources that seemed to parrot one-sided talking points, to a rhythm of coverage that looked more like orchestration than coincidence, and though such patterns alone may not convince a judge, if Blake gains access to the receipts behind them, emails instructing a publicist to leak a story, texts suggesting how to frame her as difficult, or internal memos planning a smear campaign. It could transform her case from speculative to undeniable, and that is the prospect that terrifies Baldoni's defense, because in the court of law, intent is everything, and intent is often revealed, not in polished statements, but in careless, private words. The industry watches with unease, because everyone knows how easily discovery in one case can ripple across careers, unearthing material that was never meant to see daylight, and Hollywood has been here before. Scandals exploding not because of official testimony, but because of leaked emails, from executives making crude jokes to directors mocking stars, to studio heads plotting PR takedowns of their own actors, and each time, the fallout has been catastrophic. Careers ending overnight, billion-dollar companies scrambling for cover, and this is the powder keg Blake's lawsuit threatens to ignite. A powder keg Baldoni's team is desperate to defuse before the spark of discovery lights it. The legal question, however, remains as razor-sharp as ever. Is this retaliation or routine? If the judge decides these negative stories were nothing more than Hollywood business as usual, discovery may never happen, and Blake's case may be cut off at the knees before it even gathers momentum, leaving her with nothing but the narrative she has tried to shape, while Baldoni walks away vindicated, shielded by the armor of PR norms and constitutional protections. Yet if the judge sees enough smoke to suspect fire, discovery could be unleashed, and with it, the possibility of evidence that could reshape not only this case, but the entire way Hollywood thinks about its press machine. And this is why speculation runs rampant outside the courtroom, because insiders whisper that Blake strategically filed in California for a reason. Its laws on retaliation and workplace protections are far stronger than those in other jurisdictions, giving her the best possible footing to survive early motions and make it to discovery, while Baldoni's team counters with every effort to shift the legal battlefield, arguing that other states' laws should govern, laws that are narrower, stricter, and far less friendly to her claims. And it becomes clear that beneath the headlines, this fight is as much about geography as it is about facts, because the choice of law could flip the outcome from a legitimate case to nothing at all. But even as the lawyers clash over jurisdiction, procedure, and constitutional shields, the larger question remains one of perception, because in Hollywood, perception is reality, and the longer this case drags on, the more it shapes Blake's and Baldoni's reputations regardless of the ultimate ruling, with fans and detractors each reading the tea leaves, interpreting filings as victories or defeats, dissecting each headline as evidence of guilt or innocence, until the legal process itself becomes just another form of entertainment, another season of the never-ending drama that is celebrity culture. The irony, of course, is brutal. Both sides claim to be victims of PR manipulation while simultaneously weaponizing PR in their own favor, issuing statements, leaking details, and framing narratives to sway not just the judge but the public, because both know that in Hollywood, the court of public opinion often matters more than the court of law, and even if Blake were to lose the case legally, if she convinces the world she was retaliated against, she may still win in the larger narrative. While if Baldoni keeps the case out of discovery and successfully frames her as overreaching, he may emerge stronger, not just legally but professionally, reinforcing the idea that he is untouchable, clever, and willing to fight dirty when necessary, a reputation both dangerous and useful in the cutthroat world of film. This duality, law versus narrative, is what makes the case so electrifying, because it forces everyone to ask not just what happened but what story will survive. And in Hollywood, stories often outlive facts, shaping legacies long after court rulings are forgotten, which is why every motion, every leaked detail, every whispered rumor is treated like an episode in a larger saga, and why the outcome of this battle matters far beyond Blake Lively or Justin Baldoni, because it will set a precedent for how stars fight back when the industry turns its own machinery against them. As the courtroom drama grinds forward, it becomes clearer by the day that this isn't just a legal battle. It is a war fought on two stages at once, with the quiet, technical maneuvers of the courtroom echoing against the thunderous roars of the court of public opinion, and Blake Lively knows better than most that in Hollywood, perception often matters more than truth, that the story people believe can outweigh the facts proven in filings, which is why her team is relentless in shaping the narrative, dropping subtle hints to the press, ensuring each motion filed is accompanied by a headline that paints her as the silenced whistleblower standing up to the machine, while Baldoni's camp counters with its own narrative, framing him as the pragmatic professional unfairly dragged into chaos, a victim of baseless claims meant to generate sympathy and spectacle. And in this dual fight, neither side is willing to concede an inch, because reputations are the true currency of Hollywood, and both know that even if the law decides against them, the story the world accepts may define their careers for years to come. But here lies the paradox. While the courtroom moves at the pace of procedure, inching along with motions, deadlines, and rulings, the media cycle spins in hyperdrive, producing new interpretations daily, twisting speculation into near certainty, forcing lawyers to watch not only what is said in court, but what is whispered on Twitter, what goes viral on TikTok, what dominates the headlines of gossip sites that, ironically, may influence jurors and judges who claim impartiality, but live in the same media-soaked world as everyone else. And this is where the trial within the trial begins, a spectacle of spin that might matter as much as the technical details of the law. Blake's supporters point to her courage, framing her as yet another woman daring to challenge a powerful industry figure, echoing broader cultural movements that prize truth-tellers and punish suppressors, while her critics dismiss her as manipulative, opportunistic, leveraging victimhood for clout and control. And in this clash of narratives, every detail becomes ammunition: her body language at events, the timing of her statements, the tone of her public remarks. Everything is dissected to either elevate her as a champion or expose her as a schemer. Baldoni, meanwhile, plays a quieter game, knowing that overexposure can backfire, allowing his legal filings to do most of the speaking while allies in the industry whisper off the record to sympathetic journalists, painting Blake as erratic, unstable, a risk not worth associating with. And whether those whispers are strategy or truth hardly matters, because once the seed is planted, reputations shift subtly, producers hesitate quietly, and opportunities evaporate without explanation. All of which underscores why Blake is fighting so hard, not just for legal victory, but for survival in the ecosystem of Hollywood itself. For what good is a court win if the industry closes its doors, if casting directors and studios decide she is too controversial, too difficult, too dangerous to work with? And this is where the stakes rise beyond the courtroom walls, because this isn't just about damages or verdicts. It's about whether Blake Lively will remain a bankable star or become yet another cautionary tale of a celebrity who challenged the system and found herself sidelined, and whether Justin Baldoni emerges as a clever strategist who crushed a frivolous case or as a man who silenced a woman through legal technicality and PR, an image that could define him in an era increasingly hostile to such narratives. The judge, meanwhile, faces the unenviable task of cutting through all of this noise, of deciding not only whether Blake's claims survive motions, but whether they hold substance in the rigid world of law, where emotion counts for little and words are weighed against statutes, precedents, and procedures. Yet judges are human too, aware of the ripples their rulings send through culture, aware that their decision may be dissected far beyond legal circles, and this awareness shapes subtle choices, tilting rulings in ways no statute could predict, which is why both teams argue as much for the optics as for the law, peppering their filings with language designed to resonate beyond the courtroom, to frame their side as righteous in the eyes of both the judge and the watching world. And so the trial becomes something larger than itself, a referendum on Hollywood's culture of retaliation, a mirror reflecting how far stars are willing to go to protect their images, and how the very tools designed for promotion can be weaponized into punishment, raising the ultimate question that no legal ruling can truly answer. Was Blake Lively a victim of retaliation or simply another player caught in Hollywood's endless game of spin, where truth and fiction blur until even those involved no longer know where one ends and the other begins? Blake Lively's empire of glamour, secrecy, and carefully manufactured smiles stood on the very edge of collapse as the courtroom air thickened with the tension of shattered illusions, because Brian Friedman had not just entered this legal battle as an attorney. He had stormed into it like a strategist of war, armed with documents, recordings, testimonies, and a relentless conviction that the truth, no matter how ugly or inconvenient for Hollywood's golden elite, would rise and stand in judgment of Blake herself. And in this final part of the saga, we trace the most explosive revelations, the final moves, and the haunting question that echoed across tabloids, networks, and fans' living rooms. Could Blake Lively, once the darling of Gossip Girl and Hollywood royalty, actually face the shadow of jail time for what Brian called her web of manipulation, deceit, and obstruction of justice? And the story unfolded with the force of a storm no one could stop as reporters huddled outside the courthouse, shouting questions, cameras flashing, and the world waiting for the woman who had once defined elegance on red carpets to step into a place where no designer gown, no publicist's press release, no carefully staged paparazzi moment could save her. Because inside those walls, only truth, law, and evidence mattered, and Friedman was making sure every thread of her deception unraveled in public view, starting with a hammer blow: the leaked emails that revealed Blake had allegedly worked with a private network of PR handlers to not only bury stories, but to plant false ones against rivals, a move that, if proven in court, would not only tarnish her career, but open her up to charges of perjury and deliberate obstruction. And as this was read out, the judge's face tightened, while Blake sat frozen, her once confident smile replaced by a nervous tremor in her jawline, and Ryan Reynolds, her husband, now looked more distant than supportive, whispering to his own legal advisors rather than leaning toward her, showing the fracture not only in her case, but in the personal alliances she had thought unbreakable, because the deeper Friedman dug, the more her allies began to crumble. And then came the bombshell: Justin Baldoni, who had until then been portrayed as a co-star and collaborator dragged unfairly into her orbit, finally stepped forward with what Friedman called a spine of courage, testifying that Blake had allegedly manipulated behind the scenes during their joint projects, orchestrating narratives that painted her as the victim and others as aggressors. And when Baldoni uttered the words, "She used me, she used everyone, and she thought she could use the system the same way," the courtroom gasped, and even seasoned journalists looked stunned, scribbling furiously in their notepads, because this wasn't just about civil disputes anymore. It was about credibility, morality, and whether the justice system would finally pierce the Hollywood shield of untouchable stardom. And while Blake's defense scrambled to object, to delay, to cast shadows on Friedman's evidence, he responded with a calm yet cutting clarity, dismantling their points one by one, laying out a timeline of her alleged actions that painted not the picture of a misunderstood actress, but of a strategist in deception. And this timeline stretched across years, from early backroom dealings with publicists to more recent courtroom maneuvers designed to stall truth. And every date, every communication, every discrepancy was laid bare until the gallery felt they were watching not a glamorous Hollywood star, but the unraveling of a calculated operator who had finally been cornered. And in that moment, the energy shifted. This wasn't just entertainment fodder anymore. It was accountability writ large, and Friedman's voice cut through. Fame does not excuse perjury. Celebrity does not excuse obstruction. And the public deserves to know that the same law applies to the powerful as it does to the powerless. Words that ricocheted through headlines within minutes, igniting debates on social media, with hashtags like #BlakeOnTrial, #FriedmanStrikes, and #JailNext trending worldwide, while commentators on talk shows dissected whether this was the death knell of her career or the opening of a darker chapter yet to come. Because whispers were already swirling that the DA's office was evaluating certain aspects of her case for potential criminal referral, and the thought that Blake Lively could move from mansion gates to prison bars was both shocking and magnetic to a world obsessed with the rise and fall of idols. And as Part 5 of this unfolding saga surged forward, Friedman unveiled yet another layer. Text messages between Blake and unnamed Hollywood insiders, where she allegedly discussed strategies to discredit witnesses, to manipulate narratives, and even to drown out unfavorable coverage by feeding tabloids with alternative scandals, and as these messages were projected in the courtroom, Blake buried her face in her hands, her team visibly shaken, and even the judge leaned forward, eyebrows raised, signaling the gravity of the material, because these weren't just embarrassing. They hinted at intent, at willful action, at the very kind of premeditated interference that courts punish most severely. And still Friedman was not done, as he shifted gears to expose how Blake's carefully maintained public image was not only inconsistent with her private moves, but actively weaponized to shield her from accountability, arguing that the America's Sweetheart Act was used as a legal strategy to sway public opinion, something he called a fraud against the court of public trust, and his closing lines. Lines in that hearing shook the very ground. If the law is not applied here, then we are saying to the world that lies, manipulation, and celebrity status stand above justice, and that cannot happen under my watch, leaving the room in stunned silence, because it was not only a statement about Blake Lively, but about Hollywood itself, about the untouchable aura celebrities had wrapped around themselves for decades, and outside. Fans who once screamed for autographs now held divided signs, some reading justice for Blake, others accountability for all, as if the culture itself was split between those still blinded by her past roles and those awakened to the idea that idols can fall. And as the day closed, the press release from Friedman's office landed with the weight of finality. We have exposed the truth. Now the court must decide the consequences, sparking fevered speculation. Would the judge sanction her? Would civil penalties be enough? Or would prosecutors take the unprecedented step of criminal action, a step that would etch this trial into history as the moment when Hollywood's walls finally cracked, and as Blake was escorted out, head lowered, avoiding cameras, the whispers grew louder, the commentary harsher, and the sense of inevitability more crushing, because the question was no longer whether her reputation could be saved, it was whether her freedom could be, and that is where the chapter ends. Not with a clear verdict, but with a terrifying possibility that a star who once symbolized beauty and charm could soon be defined by concrete walls and prison blues, proving once again that when Brian Friedman strikes, he does not just win cases, he rewrites destinies, and this time, Blake Lively's destiny may be a cautionary tale for all of Hollywood.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe my channel Corevanta for more updates. With Sardar Zuriat Abbas Khan Lashari.